Contradictions, security concerns, and backlash. The Prime Minister visits India to bolster economic and diplomatic ties, but it's also sparking a lot of controversy. I'm Ben Mulrooney. The West Block starts right now. As Mark Carney aims to reset relations with New Delhi, controversy even within his own party is being seen at home. We speak with former CSIS manager Dan Stanton. But first,
our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
As the U.S. and Israel launch strikes against Iran, Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Plus, as Ukraine enters its 5th year of fending off Russia, we ask Donald Trump's former national security advisor what he saw of the relationship between Trump and Vladimir Putin.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated.
After weeks of buildup, Donald Trump is targeting Iran.
We're going to annihilate their navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world and attack our forces. And we will ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon.
The Americans are being joined in this attack by Israel.
It was Iran's proxy, Hamas, that launched the monstrous October 7th attacks on Israel, slaughtering more than 1,000 innocent people, including 46 Americans, while taking 12 of our citizens hostage. It was brutal, something like the world has never seen before. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. I'll say it again. They can never have a nuclear weapon.
Another problem for Trump, and it's his problem, is that he hasn't prepared the country for what's going on now, hasn't fully explained. He had the 8-minute speech, but I think more work could have been done in advance. We could have done more work with allies, but to be sure, there are no significant numbers of American boots on the ground at this point. There may be some special operators and Israelis, but this is not a combat arms operation. It's not infantry, armor, and artillery, and I doubt that it would be. So once we have eliminated air defenses to the extent that that's possible, and I think it's very possible, the Israelis are at work at it. Once we've eliminated Iran's ballistic missile capability, which you're seeing in the deployed in the region now, then it becomes very hard for them in a military sense to pose much difficulty for us, and we can take all the time that we need systematically to turn the Revolutionary Guard bases and headquarters into ash heaps.
Ambassador Bolton, how do you read the current situation?
The real undecided question is, will he order more strategic operations to help the opposition overthrow the regime? He doesn't know what he wants to do on that yet. We'll know when it happens. But it's a major difference from the first term. In this term, he has said he favors changing the regime in Tehran. That was not his position in the first term. So he's at least open to that possibility.
And going back to weapons, about a week ago, Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy, warned that Iran could be a week away from having industrial-grade bomb-making material. But in June of last year, the White House claimed they had obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. So what does this tell you?
Well, among other things, that the claim of obliterating the program is incorrect. The so-called 12-day war and the U.S. participation in it for one day did very extensive damage to Iran's nuclear program. That's clear. But it did not totally destroy it. And in the months since that war, there's pretty clear evidence Iran has been trying to rebuild the nuclear program, repair some of its damaged ballistic missile capabilities, and much, much more. So the issue is very live. What Witkoff said demonstrates he doesn't understand anything about nuclear weapons. What he's talking about is enriching uranium to increase the concentration of the fissile isotope U-235, which they are close to in many respects, but that's enriching a gas. You can't make a nuclear weapon out of a gas. You have to turn the gas back into uranium metal, and then you have to fabricate the weapon. So we're not at immediate risk, but we are at risk from a country that for decades has had as one of its major strategic objectives getting deliverable nuclear weapons. And that objective has not changed. There's no evidence of that and never has been.
I'd like to move on to Ukraine. It's now in its 5th year of war. President Zelensky will be speaking with the U.S. before a trilateral meeting with Russia next month. What strategy have you seen the U.S. making with regards to this war?
I don't think Donald Trump is pursuing a strategy, at least not one based on U.S. national security interest or NATO's security interest or Ukraine's interest. It's based on whether Donald Trump, can make a deal that will result in a ceasefire with whatever other conditions Ukraine and Russia agree to, so that Trump can then go on and claim he's made peace in yet another war scenario, and it's another reason why he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. That's what's driving this, not a concept of how to protect American national interest or Ukraine's or anybody else. It's all about Trump's quest for the Nobel Peace Prize at this point. And the reason he's so disappointed and yet keeps coming back to it is he thinks that his friend Vladimir Putin ultimately will find a way to accommodate him so that his friend Donald Trump will get the Nobel Peace Prize.
Speaking of that as well, Trump keeps pushing towards Ukraine ceding more territory. Why do you think that is?
I think this goes back to the attitude Trump demonstrated in the terrible meeting in February of 2025 in the Oval Office when Trump said to Zelensky, "You don't have the cards." Putin has convinced Trump that ultimately Russia is going to win this war, and that to spare the cost in human life and the economic cost of months more years more of combat, the Ukrainians should just be forced to give Russia what it wants, which is the rest of the Donbass. And I've grown increasingly concerned that Putin believes that Trump promised him that at the Alaska summit, which is one reason Putin has shown no signs of compromising. He thinks Trump has already agreed to his terms.
Ambassador, when you were in the administration, what did you see of that tie between Putin and Trump?
Well, in listening to their conversations, which was one of my responsibilities in attending meetings between Trump and Putin, it was pretty clear to me that Putin was applying his KGB training against Trump. It's nothing terribly sophisticated. It can be understood fairly straightforwardly to mean size up your opponent's weaknesses and take advantage of them, and that's what Putin does. Trump lives under the happy illusion that he and Putin are friends.
In your view, what needs to be done to end this war now?
Well, I don't think there's a satisfactory way to end the war now. I don't think the Russians will bargain seriously until their military is in retreat. They are the ones who committed the unprovoked aggression. They initiated the conflict back in 2014. They're the ones who invaded again in 2022. And it's the continued act of unprovoked aggression that needs to be repudiated, which I'm sad to say neither the United States nor the Western alliance as a whole has done for the last 4 years. And we have to remember that in Putin's view and the view of many Russians in his government and in the general public, they are fighting a war to recreate the Russian Empire as they define it. So even if we get a ceasefire in the next months in Ukraine, it doesn't mean the war is over. It just means the Russians will take time to rebuild their military, rebuild the Black Sea fleet, much of which is on the floor of the Black Sea now, and maybe even revive their economy. And then they'll come back again because in their judgment, you can't have a Russian empire without Ukraine. That's what we need to keep in mind. And don't come to the incorrect conclusion that somehow Russia can be satisfied just by swaps of land or issues like that. There's a much bigger objective that Russia is pursuing that we need to understand.
Last week, the Trump administration warned Ukraine's ambassador in Washington to rein in its long-range attacks on Russian infrastructure because strikes made in November affected U.S. investments. Apparently, the hit affected a pipeline that has 3 American shareholders. Now, as a former diplomat, how would that order have worked, and what's your reaction to it?
Well, I think there's a legitimate NATO interest in what kinds of targeting Ukraine does inside Russia, and most of what they want to do, I think, is entirely legitimate. Their entire country is a target. They're entitled to respond in kind, but there may be issues where broader questions of U.S. and NATO security are involved. I'm not sure that this particular incident qualifies for that. I'd like to know more about it. It's just come out in the past few days. It's the first I've heard about it. But honestly, if their American investors still have substantial assets in Russia, I'd have to say, in some respect, they're on their own. They've had notice for a long time that investing in Russia was risky business.
Yeah, but that opens up a lot of security questions.
Yeah, look, I think that Ukraine is entitled to go after targets deep inside Russia. I think part of what they've done by destroying Russian heavy bombers, whose mission primarily is to carry nuclear weapons to drop on the United States, is an entirely good thing. I appreciate the help that they're giving us. There may be targets, though, that raise questions that would have an impact on U.S. security. These are issues that should have been discussed with Ukraine long ago. Things could have been worked out, but it's unfortunately compatible with the idea that for 4 years we really have not taken a strategic view of how to deal with this unprovoked Russian aggression, and the fact that we've approached it in a piecemeal and somewhat incoherent way is coming home to roost now, unfortunately.
Ambassador Bolton, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. Since then, a slew of peace talks have been attempted. In March 2022, Istanbul hosted high-level negotiations where Ukraine offered neutrality if given international security guarantees. Russia demanded veto power over Ukrainian security policies. That November, Ukraine's proposal at the G20 demanded a withdrawal of Russian troops. Russia called that, quote, obviously unrealistic. August 2023, a Saudi-hosted Ukraine peace summit included 40 countries, but not Russia. No binding agreement came out of it. In February of 2025, U.S. and Russian officials meet, excluding Ukraine. Later that month, President Zelensky was berated in the Oval Office.
What you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Then in November, the U.S. proposed a 28-point peace plan, allegedly drafted by Donald Trump's envoy and President Putin's aide. The initial document apparently required Ukraine to surrender more territory to Russia and abandon NATO membership goals.
Obviously, this will ultimately have to be signed off by our presidents, although I feel very comfortable about that happening given the progress we've made. And then obviously there's the Russian side of the equation.
The White House called it, quote, a significant step forward, but no movement was seen. Earlier this year, Russia and Ukraine met for U.S.-mediated talks in the UAE, where a prisoner exchange was agreed to, but follow-up talks were strained. Trilateral talks between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia are expected early next month. Meanwhile, Russian troops continue to grind across eastern Ukraine, with absolutely nothing out of bounds, including a maternity hospital. This pregnant woman says she just escaped from her hospital bed before the drone explosion. Drones have been a key tool in this war on both sides. Fiber optic tangles are seen throughout Ukrainian towns, cobwebs left by drones controlled by wires in order to avoid electronic interference along the front lines. As Russia targets military supply routes, roads are also being covered with protection. Ukraine is aiming to put anti-drone netting over 4,000 kilometers of frontline roads by the end of the year. And Ukraine pulled off a bold Trojan horse move last June, smuggling 117 drones inside sheds with hidden retractable roofs and moving them close to Russian military bases. Drone operators then remotely opened those sheds, revealing a hive of drones that hit the enemy's nuclear-capable bombers on their own airfield. Canada joined a group aiming to arm Ukraine with 1 million more drones.
Canada has already committed to donating over 800 Canadian-made drones to Ukraine, with the first scheduled to be delivered in the coming weeks. And by joining this coalition, Canada is going to be working with our allies to get even more critical drones into the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. And we have been working closely with Ukrainian industry and our coalition partners to support Ukrainian industry in the development of their drone capabilities and to help them be more effective on the battlefield.
Ottawa has committed more than $25.5 billion in total aid to Ukraine since the start of the war, including a $40 million injection for what is needed most.
During all of our discussions, Ukraine has made it clear that artillery ammunition is one of their most urgent requirements, and they need more of it as quickly as possible.
These decisions relating to Ukraine rest with Ukraine.
Since the start of the war, Canada has steadfastly underlined its support for a sovereign Ukraine.
The planning relating to security guarantees is in motion and are being led by these security guarantees and that planning being led by Minister McGuinty from a Canadian perspective, as well as the Chief of Defence Staff. Remembering that Canada is well recognized because of the contributions relating to Operation Unifier, the expertise on the ground, the planning center at Wiesbaden. There are Canadians in particular who are leading planning and advice as a general matter.
The Prime Minister telling Global News that support is for the long haul.
We're helping to create the possibility of a lasting peace there through security guarantees and other support.